Hi everyone, I'm Marion Todd and I'm delighted to have the chance to chat to you today about the Detective Inspector Clare Mackay crime series books set in St Andrews. Today I'm actually going to talk about the first in the series, which is called See Them Run. Copy there. It's available as a paperback, an ebook and also an audiobook on Audible as well. See Them Run this year has been shortlisted for the Bloody Scotland Crime Debut of the Year prize, so I'm very excited about that. It's a huge honour to be nominated for that. What I'd like to do today is to read you a little extract from the beginning of the book and then talk a little bit about how the book came to be. So I'll just get my glasses on. And this is the opening of the book. Chapter 1. Saturday the 18th of May. And if the bride and groom would like to lead the way, let's have you all up on the floor for the Orcadian Strip the Willow. Couples began streaming onto the dance floor. Strip the Willow was popular enough, but the Orcadian version was a floor filler and the highlight of any Scottish wedding reception. From within his sporran, Andy's phone began to buzz. He fished it out, a text message from a number he didn't recognise. Hey you, like the kilt. Andy looked at the message. No name at the end. He ran through a few options in his head, then typed back, Glad you like it. The dancers were lining up now. Andy watched as his wife Angela rose unsteadily from her seat across the table. She pulled off the gold sparkly shrug she had worn to keep her arms warm and let it fall to the floor. A whiff of stale sweat reached his nostrils, and he hoped she wouldn't try to persuade him to partner her. He slid his phone off the table and back into the sporran. But he needn't have worried. She tottered over to one of the ushers seated at the next table and hauled him up to dance. Always the same. She never could hold her drink. His sporran buzzed again. So, are you a real Scotsman? What's under the kilt? What indeed? He felt a familiar stirring and leaned back in his seat, stretching his legs out under the table. The dance floor was busy now, but the alcohol had been flowing all day, and the dancers were taking some sorting out. Angela stepped out of her shoes and fired them across the floor in Andy's direction. A few others followed suit. Andy reckoned there'd be some bruised and broken toes by the end of the dance. He had to admire the smart ones who'd brought their trainers in a poly bag. But that wasn't Angela's style. Always done up to the nines. Hair, nails, shoes, the full works. Only she didn't look so glamorous now, after 9, or was it 10, vodkas. Fergus, the accordionist, his eyes almost obscured by his thick dark hair, ran his fingers up and down the keyboard, impatiently. He looked, Andy thought, as if he'd had enough for one night. Who could blame him for that? Weddings were one long hangabout. And he studied the band. He could see why Hammy was the front man and not Fergus. Tall and sinewy, as fair as Fergus was dark, Hammy had the patter and the twinkle in his eye to match. Andy thought he might be a good lad to have a pint with, judging by the beer he'd swilled over the course of the evening. Probably knew his way round the ladies as well. Anyone who could sink pints and tease those reels and jigs out of his violin while winking at the dancers had to be worth getting to know. Hammy tried again. 2 long lines. Ladies over this side, gents over here. Bride and groom at the top. Where are you, Sandra and Davy? Ah, here they come. Fergus gave a quick trill of the wedding march to cheers from the guests. Hammy gave him a look that told him to quit it, and he turned back to the dancers. If the bottom half could move down a bit, from the man in the sexy trews. There was a laugh at this, and the tartan-clad man acknowledged it with a flourish and a bow before taking his partner further down the room. Andy took his phone out again. So, she was wondering what was under the kilt, was she? He typed back a reply. Wouldn't you like to know? The bride was shouting to the guests still in their seats to get up and dance. A few of the elderly Rellies declined with a wave. Andy looked for Angela and saw she was near the top of the hall, thrusting her hips towards the usher, who was responding in kind. Hammy began to explain the dance, with the bride and groom demonstrating. The phone buzzed again. I would, as it happened. Andy scraped his chair back until it was almost touching the wall. He glanced left and right, then tapped back. We'll have to see about that then. There was a flourish from the accordion. Hammy picked up his bow, and the drummer began beating out a rhythm. Andy watched as Sandra and Davy started to whirl each other round, and he smiled as Sandra slipped and slid across the floor on her back, colliding with two men further down the line. His phone buzzed again. How about now? Andy looked round. Was the mystery texter someone in the room? The bride was back on her feet now, hauled up by the men she had almost bowled over. She rejoined the dance and began whirling again, from arm to arm, working her way down the line of dancers. The second top couple began turning each other as the band belted out the Athol Highlanders jig. As the dance progressed, it was harder to see across the room. Most of those sitting down were older couples. Certainly not anyone who looked like she might be the mystery texter. Where are you? He texted back. He watched the screen impatiently, but the reply didn't come immediately. The music switched to another jig as more and more couples joined in the dance. One over-enthusiastic young lad, all arms and legs, crashed into the chair next to Andy and carried on as if he hadn't noticed. Andy rose and began walking to the door at the back of the hall. It would be quieter outside the ballroom. As he walked, the phone buzzed again. Bottom of drive. Come now. He glanced back at the dancers. Angela wouldn't even miss him. He pushed open the ballroom door and walked out to the reception area. A slim man in a suit looked up from behind the mahogany desk, his smile fixed but pleasant. Andy gave him a nod and carried on to the front entrance, forcing the heavy brass revolving door into life. He emerged into the cool evening air and stopped for a second as the odour of cigarette smoke reached his nostrils. From the sound of it, the smokers had gathered at the side door, and he was briefly tempted to join them. Time enough for a fag after, he told himself, and he picked his way softly across the gravel to avoid being heard. A burst of laughter from the smokers confirmed he had nothing to worry about, and he quickened his pace. The front garden was illuminated by fairy lights strung along the drive, which curved gently towards the main road, lined on one side by a high beech hedge. As he walked, he wondered about the mystery texter. Who the fuck was it? He had an idea. A couple of ideas, actually. He took out his phone and looked at the text message again. Real Scotsman. He'd show her what was under his kilt all right. He glanced round to make sure he wasn't being observed, then stopped and pulled his boxers down. His sporran was already stuffed with a handful of crumpled tenors, so he screwed up the boxers and hid them in the hedge. Easy enough to retrieve them on his way back. So Andy, poor lad, has taken the decision to go outside the hotel. It's dark, it's late at night, near the end of the wedding, and he thinks he's going to meet someone for a romantic liaison. But what actually happens is Andy is run down by an unseen driver who then backs over him and speeds off into the night. The reason I wrote this story was because I wanted to explore the idea of the car as a weapon, because anyone could drive a car and run over a big lad like Andy. It could be a tiny little person, it could be a big strong boy, it could be a man, a woman, absolutely no idea who it is. And that was what I started from. And I began to think, how might this play out? Who could be the driver? And then another idea came into my head. But you'll have to read See Them Run to find out what that idea turned out to be. So happy reading, as I say. This is the book. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you so much to Lindsay for the opportunity to chat today. Bye for now.